last couple seconds to add your introduction in the chat and we will get started. So a couple of logistics as we get started. We welcome questions from you all. So you can, the best place to put questions is in the Q&A feature in Zoom. And we will answer them throughout, but also at the very end. And a recording of this workshop will be emailed to you after the session. So there's no need to worry too much about capturing all this information at once. So hopefully you are in the right place. Tonight, we are talking about how to tell your story in hiring conversations. And so the people that are joining you here to do this are myself. My name is Lauren Pizer. I am a co-founder and VP of Learning Experience at Pathstream. And I am joined by my colleague, Amy, who is the VP of Career Services, and Samira, who is a former recruiter, but is now on our Career Services team. And she's going to be providing some of the recruiter perspective throughout this presentation and also helping us answer questions at the very end. All right, so our goal today is to equip you with a framework that you can use to effectively and confidently answer the question, tell me about yourself, right? That's asked a ton of different ways in hiring conversations. For example, someone might say, hey, it's really nice to meet you. Can you tell me your story and walk me through your resume? That's another question that you might get. Or how did you go from, being a school teacher to being a project manager? That's another way this question could be asked. Or it could even be asked in a subtle way by saying, why are you interested in this company? Because what all of these questions are doing is they want you to know who you are and they want to know a little bit about your background. And so we're going to talk today about how you can tell your story in a confident and effective way. So first, let's talk about what this question is really about, okay? Because it means a lot of different things. First, it really provides an overview of your resume and of your experiences in a very quick way. And this is important because people don't have a lot of time during interviews. So this is a very quick overview of who you are. It also forces you inadvertently to sell yourself really quickly. So in this question, you generally have 1 to 2 minutes to prove yourself, to sell yourself to an employer that's asking you a question, and you get to put your story in the best light possible. It also offers a glimpse, a very quick snapshot into your personality right up front, because this is usually the first question that you get asked in interviews. So it's helping the interviewer to understand your motivation, your enthusiasm, and how much you prepared for this job interview, because you'll learn today that the more tailored your story is to the person that you're talking to, the better. So this is a quote from another recruiter that we have in our network, Amanda, and she said, the people that I'm most excited to place in jobs are the people that are most excited to talk to me, right? And so there's a couple of reasons why this is actually a really great question to be asked, okay? It's because you get to craft your story and your answer to this question in a way that creates a first impression that people will remember. So you are in control. Your personality gets to come through, your voice, your intonation, everything about you gets to come through. And you also have an opportunity to tell somebody a story, right? Most people don't take the opportunity to tell a story in this moment, but I'm going to teach you how to do that today. And people connect with stories. So you're kind of pushing yourself ahead of the competition by crafting a strong story about yourself. There's also a formula for this. What's this great news, right? I'm going to teach you that formula today. This doesn't have to be such a mystery and so difficult. So when we get into this presentation, I always like to know, who am I talking to? What do people on this call think is the hardest part of answering this question? So we're going to launch a poll, one question, and I would love to know, what is the hardest part about answering the question, tell me about yourself? What's hard for you about that? Is it that it's hard to talk about your past experiences? Maybe there's gaps in employment. I want to know kind of where you're at. I'll give you a couple more seconds. All right, Kindle, you can end that poll and show the responses. So hopefully you can see some of these results, but it looks like most people are at all the above. They're feeling like it's hard to know what to include. It's hard to talk about gaps. And it's also hard to talk about past experiences in a really generative way. So I'm happy to see this because we're going to cover all these things today. Awesome. All right. So let's start tonight by talking about some very good and some less good tell me about yourself answers, okay? Then we're going to go through a framework and then we'll do the Q&A. So what I want to know from you, so I'm going to tell you this story and I'm going to ask you a question about this story in a couple minutes. But first I want to know, first I'm going to read the story. So the hiring manager says, hey, meet Jake. Jake, tell me a little bit about yourself. And Jake says, I graduated from college a few years ago, and I wasn't totally sure what I wanted to do. I got a sales job at a tech company, and I started learning the industry. Eventually, my team was reduced. I was laid off. I took time off to help my parents, whose health was declining, and start working part-time retail jobs while I was looking for something else. A friend of mine changed careers, became a data analyst, and she recommended I explore the industry. I looked into it. Super interesting. And I ended up enrolling in a certificate program. I just finished. I'm interested in data analytics, and your company looks great, and I'd love to be a part of the team. So in the chat, I want to know, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being an excellent story, I want to know how you would rate this story. 1 is not so great. 5 is this is an excellent answer to this question. I want to see what you guys think. Okay, we got a 2. Yep, giving Jake some credit, 2s and 3s. Does anybody in the chat want to tell me what's not so great about this story? Anybody have an idea? What's something that could be better, not great? Lack of enthusiasm and direction. Yeah, that's a really good point, Brooke. It seems a little bit like Jake is kind of stumbling around, right? And he just like kind of stumbled upon this. Yeah, I stumbled into data analysis a few weeks ago. Yes, that's totally right. Awesome. This is great. Love this. Okay, let's keep moving. So let's look at this story, okay? I'm going to read it again. So this is his second try. After I graduated from college, I started my career as a sales development representative at a technology company. I taught myself about all the products I was selling. I learned Salesforce, and I developed deep relationships with large clients. I was actually in the top 10% of representatives the year that I started, and I ended up creating new systems for managing clients for my team. When my company was reduced due to company layoffs, I took some time off to take care of my parents who were not in great health. I've always been interested in data analytics, so I taught myself some basic skills on my own. But I quickly realized that I wanted a more structured program, so I enrolled in the Tableau Data Analytics Certificate at the university, and I performed all of these exploratory data analyses using spreadsheets and SQL and Tableau, and I practiced packaging insights for various business stakeholders. I got hands-on projects with data analysis, and I'm now searching for my next opportunity, and I'm very interested in your company. The work that you are all doing to make healthcare more available is a mission that's very close to my heart. As a primary caretaker for my parents, I see how important this is every day. All right, so what is one way that this story, I'd love to see it in the chat, one way that this story has improved? What's something great about this story? Or better? What is something that is improved about this? It's more specific. Yes, there's some self-motivation here, right? He's telling a different story. Connects the opportunity to his experiences, positive, highlights accomplishments. Amazing. You guys got it all right. So I want to say that Jake is the same Jake as before, right? But Jake is telling his story differently. And guess what? Even if it felt like that first story was more of what happened, that he kind of stumbled through life a little bit, Jake is Jake. He gets to make the story he wants in front of employers. So he worked to make his story sound more cohesive and sound more intentional. And that's the exact same thing that you guys can do too. So in a little bit more specifics, let's talk about what's great about this. So This story is very specific in terms of his past skills and his role. He was an SDR. He had to learn Salesforce. He was the top 10% of for his year. Okay. This is sounding a little bit braggy sometimes, but he's talking about his accomplishments. And this is very specific and important for employers to hear. He also, as I said, he demonstrates those accomplishments. I performed exploratory data analysis using these tools. He talks himself up, right? And I think that is very, very important to do in your story, because if you are not advocating for yourself and talking yourself up, nobody else is going to talk you up, right? So it's your job to talk yourself up in the way that feels authentic to you. So he mentions that he was laid off, right? Now we're going to talk about getting laid off or taking time off in a minute, but he mentions it and doesn't overemphasize it, right? He takes the time off and he explains what he was doing during that time. He was taking care of his parents and he was teaching himself skills. Great, move on. And he clearly names the program that he's enrolled in, right? He's not just saying, oh, I was enrolled in some program. I took the Tableau data analytics certificate at this university, and here's what I learned. And finally, he makes a connection between his skills and his interests and the company he's talking to. This is an example of customization, right? So when he's talking to this healthcare company, he's going to say something different than if he's talking to an education company, because you want to make that person you're talking to feel special in your story and feel like they have a unique place in your story. So this is a confident story, right? And it talks about his past, his present, and his future. And that's basically the structure that he used to organize this. So let's do a little recap, okay, before we move on to more content. Let's talk about, in one place, what makes a great answer to this question. Well, it's a confident story about your past, your present, and your future. You get to show off and highlight your accomplishments and your skills and motivation. He confidently acknowledges a career change. That's something you should do too. And disruptions in career, right? You don't mention all of your past experiences. Okay, so we're going to talk specifically about this, but some of you guys mentioned that it's hard to know which past experiences to talk about. That's a really good question, and we need to get to that, because he doesn't say that he was a bartender for a little bit and then he worked at his dad's business. Like, he doesn't say all of that. He could have, but he chose not to, and I'll explain why. And then he describes how the interests developed with intention, right? So in the first story, Jake sounded like not that intentional. And maybe that's the way it felt to him. But in the second story, he has more intention. And he's not lying in the second story. He's just making more of a clear story with a thread that makes his journey look more intentional, right? And again, it makes the other person feel special and unique because it calls out the healthcare company and why he wants to work there. All right, so let's talk about this framework. So now we've looked at an example. Now, how do you apply this to your own life and your own story? All right, so in order to answer this question well, my advice to you is to use a framework that first talks about your past. So you're going to start by talking about your past experiences and accomplishments. Then you're going to move on to talk about where you are today, if you're working, if you're learning, if you're taking time off. And then you talk about what you want for your future. And that's when you bring in the company that you're talking to. So let's take a look at another example. And I'm going to give my voice a break, and I'm going to ask Amy to read this story for Stefan.
So this is Stefan's story. In the past, he says, I've been working in the event planning industry for the past 10 years. I absolutely loved the thrill of organizing 10,000 person events, working with diverse clients, and managing budgets. By the end of my tenure in planning, I was managing a team of 30 people across 6 regions. As COVID began to slow down and eventually halt the event business, I decided to explore some of my other passions. I had always been intrigued by digital marketing and even had some experience with it while event planning. I often supported the marketing team that promoted the various events I led. so had awareness of various marketing strategies and tools in the industry. And then he shifts to talking about his present. So I recently decided to fully transition my career into the digital marketing space and enrolled in the Facebook Digital Marketing Certificate Program at a university. In this program, I am creating marketing plans, social media strategies, and various pieces of content marketing and social media ads. And finally, he talks about his future. So he says, I'm most interested in this specific company because I'm looking for a role where I can combine my digital marketing skills with my event planning experience. The role at this company will allow me to use my marketing skills to support small businesses in marketing their events to a larger audience, which is very exciting and motivating to me, given my background.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. So this is just an example, okay? But what I want you to think about is, okay, so we had Stefan craft his past. Now let's talk about how you can craft your past, okay? So here's a template, and you're going to get this after, you're going to get this email after with a recording of this, but here's the template that I think you should use when you're talking about your past. So somebody says, tell me about yourself, and you might use the template over the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I've been working as a blank. In this role, I developed skills in, I accomplished, I got really interested and inspired by, I learned blank about myself, I taught myself, I realized there was much more I wanted to learn about. Now, even if you haven't been in the same role or the same industry for a couple of years, you can say something like, over the past year, I've been working in the events industry. Prior to that, I actually had a career in customer service. But over these several experiences, I've really learned a lot about XYZ. So you don't have to have consistency here. So here's an example for Julia. After high school, I went right into working for my family business. I scaled the painting business from 1 to 5 cities over the past 2 years. I learned how to manage people and budgets, and this business was doing really well, but I wanted to equip myself with new technical skills that could help me learn even more about scaling businesses and make data-driven decisions for a company. So what do you include in your past, and what do you not include when you're talking about your past? So you definitely want to include past jobs. You want to include what you accomplished in those roles. So now this is where it feels a little braggy maybe, but I want you to think about what's your proudest moment in those past jobs. Something that you're like, yeah, I did that, right? Or I did those things, or I learned this. You want to talk about skills you've gained. And you also can mention gaps or time off in your career. But again, let's talk about that in a little bit, but it might make sense to mention it at this point in your past. And you also want to talk about your career interests. So people like to talk to passionate people, right? So I want you to think about how you can use your past to talk about and build your passion for something, right? Even if it didn't really feel passionate in the moment, I want you to think about how you can start building that story of how your interest grew in something. A couple things not to include. I don't want you to include a play-by-play of every role. I graduated from college. I started working as a bartender. Then I was an office manager. Then I took time off. Then I tried to go back to school. We don't need that, right? That is something for you to write down in this next activity that we're going to do, but it's not something you need to share in your story. You don't necessarily need to include the jobs that didn't help you get anywhere. Okay, so if a role was just to make ends meet and you didn't really learn very much, or it didn't contribute to where you are today, you might want to consider leaving that one out. You also can disclude any specifics on why you were laid off, right? That we can get to in a little bit, but you do not need to tell them more details than is necessary about that. So one of the things that is really hard for people is actually figuring out how to talk about your past. Because people are like, well, what do I include? Like, how much do I say? How do I make it sound good? Because it doesn't really sound good right now. So let's talk about an activity that I want you to do, okay? So here it is. The first thing you're gonna do is write down every job that you've held since high school. And that should include education. Any time off, put everything down. Like, what did you do since high school? Okay. Those things might be, here's an example for this person. So they worked as a bartender. They enrolled in college. They took courses in project management. They didn't finish college. They became a receptionist. They got laid off. They started contract work in medical billing, and they didn't really like that. So they started searching for a new career. And then they found a project management certificate. Okay. So here are all the things that this person did right after high school. The next step is to underline the experiences that gave you skills and taught you something that's gotten you to where you are today. So basically underline the most meaningful things you've done. Okay. Here's an example. So working as a bartender, not so meaningful for this person. For other people, it could be meaningful depending on what you were doing. Enrolling in college was good because she was able to take courses in project management, sparked her interest in project management, right? That story, that interest. She became a receptionist, which she felt is important to her. She also started contract working in medical billing, which is also important to her. So here are the things she wrote down or that she underlined. Now, you're going to take each of the things that you underlined and package them into the past template. So put them into the template that we just looked at. So here's how this is going to look, okay? So in order to do this, you have to reframe each of these experiences. So what do I mean by reframe? What does that mean? So the first thing she underlined was that she took college courses in project management. When I want to know why this mattered to her. And here's what she says. This was my first exposure to project management. I remember I loved it because it was so orderly. It just made sense to me. That's why this is important. It sparked her interest in project management. It was orderly. She was first exposed to the field by doing this. Next thing, she underlined receptionist. Why is it important to her? She actually practiced a lot of project management and other transferable skills like communication and teamwork. Great. So as a receptionist, she's starting to build skills and practice project management. Very relevant, very important to include. Medical billing. Even though she hated the job, but I had to build project management skills here too, because I also attention to detail, even though she didn't like it. So even if it doesn't contribute to what she wants to do today, she learned something in it and she wants to include that. So now she's going to take this and she's going to put it into the template. So here's how that looks. I was first introduced to project management in college, where I took a few courses and absolutely loved it. My role was as a receptionist at a law firm where I put my first role was as a receptionist where I put my project management skills into practice. I implemented a new scheduling system for the office. I organized all of the company events and I interacted with over 20 clients a day. I then transitioned into a role in healthcare where I used my project management skills to ensure all insurance claims were correctly billed for a large top 5 insurance company. I managed and organized over 100 claims a day. And while my past experiences have been very diverse, right? Medical billing, reception, they're all over the place. I've had the opportunity to use project management across a variety of industries and really build that skill set. Amazing. Sounds great. Check. That's her past. So we're going to move on to the next part of the story, which is present. But before I do that, now is the time where I want to talk a little bit about gaps in your resume or gaps in your work experience, okay? So we all have things in our past that we wish were different. Maybe we got laid off, right? Maybe we changed jobs really frequently because we didn't really like what we were doing. Maybe we got fired. So that's okay because it happens to all of us, I promise you. At some point, there's something we're not proud of. There are other things in our past that are courageous, right? And make us who we are today, but they may have also taken us out of the workforce, right? Those are things like a medical illness, a mental illness, taking care of a sick family member, having a baby is a huge life event, right? That makes us who we are. Traveling the world, whatever it is, right? There are different types of reasons to be out of the workforce, okay? But I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions in order to determine what to include and what not to include, because there's no hard and fast rule. There's no rule that says always include this, never include this, okay? Because everybody has a different story. But there are a couple of things I want to bring up. The first question you should ask yourself is this something that I feel comfortable sharing with other people? If there was something in your medical history that you don't really want to share with other people, you don't have to do that, right? That's nobody's business but yours. So you can say, I was out of the job market for a medical reason, and I rejoined when I was better, right? That's it. You don't have to say more than that. You also want to ask yourself, is this a meaningful part of my career story? Right? So did I learn something in this that I could bring into my story? Maybe you took time off to take care of your children and you realized a couple of things. You taught yourself some stuff. That is worth mentioning and bringing into your story in a really positive way. And the third question is, if I don't include this in my story, is someone going to say something and ask me a bunch of questions, right? And my general rule of thumb here is that if you've been out of the job market for more than a year, it's likely that somebody's going to ask you about it. But if you've got like a couple of months in between your jobs, I personally don't think that that's a big deal. We can ask Samira at the end of this if she feels it's a big deal from the recruiting perspective. But for me, a couple months here and there is not something that you need to over-explain. So if you've got more questions about this at the end, bring those up at the end of the presentation and we'll get them answered. But these are my thoughts on gaps in resume. Or gaps in your story. So let's move on. We've done step one, which is your past. Now we're going to start talking about the present. Okay. So this is the next part of your story. So here's the template that I recommend you use for the present. So I was doing all this stuff, blah, 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 blah. Now I just completed, or I just enrolled in a education program, a certificate program, which taught me skills such as blank, blank, blank. In this program, I worked on this. I'm working on projects like this. I'm also still working part-time or full-time at a company. If you're not enrolled in a program, that's totally fine. Just say something like, I'm currently employed at blank doing all of these different things. If you don't have a job, just say, here's what I'm working on in my free time. I've been looking for roles. I'm teaching myself something. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Just, you want to sound busy. You want to sound like you're doing things, which you are. So explain what you're doing in the present. Here's an example for Julie. I recently enrolled in the Tableau Data Analytics Certificate, which taught me analysis tools such as spreadsheets, SQL, Tableau. I conducted exploratory data analysis. And on the side, I'm also still working for my family business to apply what I've learned in data analysis. All right? Doesn't have to be complicated, just in a description of the present. So what do we include here and what do we not include here? Education. Even if it's self-taught, stuff that you're teaching yourself, great, include that. A lot of people are learning by themselves these days. Specifics of what you're doing, brag a little bit, highlight your accomplishments, show people what you're doing. And you also want to include any jobs, freelance, contract, volunteer, all of that is great to include. There's a couple of things you're not going to want to include. If you're doing a part-time job or a temporary job that's not really related to your ultimate career goal, you don't really need to mention that necessarily. If you want to, you can, but you don't have to, because it kind of detracts from your story. It's a little bit like a distraction. So we talked about our present, right? Now let's go to the future. So this is the last part of the story. So this is where you want to talk about what you want to do now. So I'm looking for a career where I can combine my interest in blank with my skills in blank. I want to bring this skill set to your company because I'm inspired by your commitment, your mission, your values, your belief in whatever it is that you can find out. So you got to do a little research when you get to this part of the template. This isn't just going to come out from your story. You have to figure out what your story is about this. You could also say something like, I'm inspired and passionate about this issue because of this reason. Your company is aligned with this passion, right? You guys are helping to do this thing that I'm passionate about. And I want to come to your company to use my skills in a way that's aligned with my purpose. Another great way to say it. Doesn't have to be overly complicated, but my advice is always to find something about what the company is doing and how they're doing it. Either their mission, their company values, something you've read about the company, and create the attachment in that way. So here it is for Julie. I'm looking for a career where I can combine my experience in scaling early stage companies with my skills in data analysis. The role at your company is an ideal environment for me to apply my entrepreneurial spirit to solving complex data challenges in a fast-paced startup environment. Perfect, great, simple. So what do we include here? The connection between your newly gained skills or your new interest and the company that you want to talk to, your passion or your interest. So this is really where you want to come out the gate looking passionate and interested and excited about the opportunity. So this is where you want to really go all in. You do not want to include vague or impersonal information about the company. They will know that it's vague and impersonal, right? Somebody that's talking to you will know if you're just kind of didn't do the research or if you did. So this is a good place to stand out to a recruiter or to a hiring manager. So here is Julie's story all put together. I will not read it again. We've all read it already, but this is how she would read it. And not read it, here's how she would say it. But I'm going to tell you a tip about how actually the best way to do this is to write it down first. So now one of the last things I want to do before I start moving to questions is how you deliver it is just as important as what is written in your story and what you say. So a couple of tips. You need to practice this before you do it in an interview. So I'm telling you exactly what I've done throughout my career, which is I've written down my story on a piece of paper, on the computer. I write it down using this template and I practice reading it. I practice talking about it in an interview as if I'm reading it. But what's great today is that most early stage interviews are on the phone or they're on Zoom. And you can literally have a piece of paper up on your computer with your notes of your story at the same time as you're talking, and people won't notice. Because I really don't think it's a great idea to just wing it, right? You want to have the notes, you want to have what you're going to say, and you need to write it down as a way to create this story. So that's my second one. Write it on a piece of paper, practice delivering it. You also want to tailor this. So when I'm preparing for an interview, I tailor my story to each company that I'm talking to. And that's really kind of like if I'm talking to a company in education versus a government company, then I'm going to pick out maybe some different experiences from my past to talk about what I'm interested in doing. And so there's a little creativity that comes in here and definitely research about the company. And finally, confidence. Okay. I know that it's really easy for me to stand up here and say, just be confident. Confidence is very difficult, right? And sometimes you really don't feel confident about your story. But I want you to know that we all have really unique stories, okay? And there's no story that is better than another. We all have places that we've been and places that we want to go and some things that we wish were a little bit different or we wish was more linear, right? But I promise you that no one has that linear story. They've just written that linear story for themselves. They've shaped and they've molded their past story to sound more linear. That's what we all do because it doesn't always feel linear in the moment. So just remember that if you're not speaking confidently about your story, no one is going to receive it confidently. It's only you that has that power. You get to say what you want to say. You get to include things and disclude other things. That's your prerogative. You don't want to lie, but you get to shape your story. So do it with confidence. All right. So little recap on what we covered today. The answer to the question, tell me about yourself, requires preparation and really writing out your past, present, and future using this template. We want you to look at your past experiences and pull out the ones that really relate to where you want to go in your career. Maybe they taught you a transferable skill. Maybe they sparked your interest. Maybe they taught you something. Those are the great experiences to include in your past. When describing your present, boast a little bit. Talk about your accomplishments. Don't shy away from that. And in the future, talk about why you want to work at that company and really tailor it. And finally, be confident, be proud. This is your story. So before I move to the Q&A, if you are interested in a Pathstream program, this is the kind of content that we go through a lot with our students in career services for our Pathstream programs. Visit pathstream.com/programs and check out the programs we have coming up. We actually have some programs starting later this month if you're interested in it. And really quick before the Q&A, we have 2 more of these workshops. So we have a workshop on October 7th on how to optimize your resume and get ready for calls with recruiters. And then we have a workshop on negotiation, salary negotiation. So put these on your calendars, get ready for them. And I want to see if there are questions that I can help you all answer. So if you've got anything, put it in the Q&A. And I want to give Samira a minute. She is an actual recruiter. I am not an actual recruiter, but Samira was an actual recruiter. And I want to give her a minute to just kind of reflect on anything that she heard and add anything to things that I've said today.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, so to piggyback off the point that the question you were trying to make earlier about the gaps in your story, I will say that I've had gaps in my own experience in my career, and it's taken different twists and turns. And I think there's a lot of interesting, compelling learnings and growth that you get from that. So while you may not include all of those gaps, and that's totally okay, all the hiring managers I've ever worked with in tech or not, never batted an eye at 2 to 3 months or even 6 months of a career gap. Now, when we're talking about multiple years, that's when the wheels start turning. They want to learn more. But if it's just those few months, there's still some really compelling, really interesting things you can share. Whatever the reason was for the gap, right? You might have taken some time off to try to start a new company, or take care of family members, just like Lauren was saying. But the story itself is really what you sell, if you will, to a potential employer. And they want that personality. They want that character to come out. They're trying to add diversity to their team. They're trying to add these diverse backgrounds and experiences that makes their product and their team be able to connect with their customers better. So when you think of all these things in that sense, it's really easy to be able to add to your story, tell those the story with those gaps, and explain what you learned, if there was any leadership that you gained, even when you take time off for a child or a parent. Maybe you learn time management skills like you never had to before. I can imagine you would have to, because now you're juggling multiple schedules of other people. But maybe it was also some just self-awareness things, right? You just learned some important character building traits. So anyway, I hope that's encouraging. I hope that's helpful. And anything on top of that, the conversation today is really about your brand, right? Who do you want to share with the world? And I know that's a catchphrase, and it's very popular to use that right now, but it's kind of the truth. Who do you want to show the world, that authentic voice of who you are? And you want to make it packaged kind of easy for people to understand or digest in a short period of time, because over the interview process, hopefully it's 2, 3, 4 stages, they'll get to know you more and more. So in that first meeting, that first phone screen, you want to be able to deliver it pretty concisely, 1 to 2 minutes, right? But then build on that, and to be able to develop that further, the further along you go in the process.
That's great. That's totally true. The story is like the jumping off point for all the other questions that you're going to be asked. There's a question in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'm curious, Amy and Samira, what you think of this. Is there an issue if somebody's LinkedIn profile has roles that are listed and experiences that don't necessarily match up with the resume? So the resume and the LinkedIn don't necessarily match up. Have you ever seen that? Is there any problems with that?
So good question. I think that if at all possible, you want your resume to match LinkedIn as close as you can. The cool and fun thing about LinkedIn, though, is you can add a whole lot of other personality and character to it. You can, there's so many features that make it much more interactive. So when they're different, it's helpful, to be able to put in the description maybe why it's different. If you're working on a book, or if you're working on a podcast, or if you're doing a nonprofit work, you may not want to include that in a resume because then it'll make your resume too long. But all those things are really interesting and compelling, especially when you can tie it right to that main through line, right, for your story, who you are, what you're pursuing. And if it looks a little different, like maybe you're just making an album and you're trying to promote some sort of music or something different, then so be it. But it's okay to be a little bit different. But just recognizing that LinkedIn is a professional networking site. So focusing on important keywords that recruiters, hiring managers are looking for when you're looking for work, I think that's critical. Merging it too much with Facebook, I think, is inappropriate. I think keeping it professional, keeping it aligned to the story you want to tell to employers or partners, people you'd want to collaborate in a professional way is ideal.
Yeah, and I would just add to that and say, you know, the basic facts of your employment history should not be different on your resume versus your LinkedIn profile. So like the dates that you held a job, kind of the core job title that you held. If employers start to see a lot of discrepancies there, that's when they're going to get kind of skeptical of, are you lying? Are you like trying to spin this too much? But I would say that when you're creating a resume that you're applying to a specific role for, you can change some of the bullet point descriptions to emphasize different things that are maybe more relevant to that particular role that you're applying to. But just don't make too many factual discrepancies between your LinkedIn and your resume.
Awesome. So we got 2 good questions in the chat, in the Q&A. Tonetta is asking how to not sound overqualified, even though you have the experience and maybe more. And one thing that I'll say here, and then I'll pass it off, is that you don't want to undersell yourself. You don't want to underscore your achievements. So you want to be honest about what you want to do. But you can also say something like, look, I've got a lot of skills in this area. I'm very, I have many years of experience, but I'm really excited to learn and to grow in these other areas by joining your company, right? So you can acknowledge it and say, yeah, I got a lot of experience in this area, but I really want to join your company because of this reason, right? So it helps people understand, oh, this person has maybe more years of experience than we need, but they also are trying to grow in this other area, and that makes it a really good fit. Anything to add, Samira and Amy, on that one?
No, I agree with that completely. Just that growth mindset is super critical. That's also become a common catchphrase these days, but showing that growth, the trajectory, even if you have loads and loads of experience, totally cool. Now, I mean, maybe you can go for a bigger position, right? Because you have that. Maybe you can look for people or connect with people on LinkedIn or network stronger so that you can get into a position where you think you can align the new skills you have with the old skills, and it just can take you to a whole nother level. I mean, a lot of people may not consider this, but try starting a business, right? Like you can do that because you have all this great past experience that you can leverage. But yeah.
We also often see that Pathstream students might have years of work experience in a different field, and then they're trying to transition to a new one. So if that's the case, you can do things like perhaps leave off the years of your degree on your resume, so they're not seeing that you're maybe an older candidate, and instead just emphasize your most recent work history and the roles that you've had that are relevant to the position you're applying for. Because you don't want to kind of get cut out of the job search for a more entry-level position in a new field just because you have years of work history that you've, been doing for a 20+ year career, but you're trying to make a switch. So you can think about that too.
Yeah, humility, right? That's huge there.
So there's another question here about talking about roles that you've held over 10 years ago. And my answer to this is that what makes a great story is that it has it makes sense. There's a theme about it, it's building, right? So if you have if you had 10 years in the food industry, right? And then you're trying to transition to something else, then I want to know how the food industry is related to where you want to go. One day in the kitchen, I had this aha moment that I needed, what's the story here about what these last 10 years have taught you that have brought you to where you are now? So mention it, but think about what's the common theme and the thread here that you can use to connect all of these different pieces. Samira, Amy, anything to add on that question about roles older than 10 years.
Yeah,
I do
you go
sometimes
ahead.
see that, people might have started a career in IT and then maybe gone and worked for a university or something totally unrelated. And now you're trying to get back into a tech field. So if you have prior work experience that is really relevant to this next chapter in your career, that's when you could consider leaving out some of those middle positions that might be less relevant and highlighting the roles that are particularly aligned to this new job that you're wanting to enter. But like Lauren said, it's really about making a through line that shows how your past work history and other professional experiences are connected to the opportunity that you want to pursue next.
Amy, I'm curious your thoughts on this question by James. How would you recommend we put on the LinkedIn job title caption that you're currently unemployed? Or if you're currently unemployed, what should you kind of write in your LinkedIn job title or like headline? I think he's talking about.
Yeah, that's great. So if you're enrolled in a Pathstream certificate, we have many examples of how people have created LinkedIn headlines that are really compelling. One of the things is that you can actually highlight that you are, a Tableau certified data analyst and really highlight that you have this professional certificate. And then even put some skills keywords in that headline. So I can share some examples in the chat of how students have done this. But Samira, I'm also curious from your perspective of what you've seen that's effective.
Good question. Sorry, forgot to unmute. So LinkedIn job title, that was a question and caption. So that is such an interesting one. And obviously the great part about LinkedIn and also resumes, but LinkedIn is you can change that anytime you want, right? You could do some A/B testing. I would also suggest checking out other profiles, right? That's always the best way to see what gains traction. What are some profiles that you've already looked at or people you wanted to connect with or network with that are in the roles that you want to be in or doing the things that you're excited by? See what they're doing. See also what where they came from too, and kind of just follow their content. I wouldn't make them too long because those aren't really relevant in a recruiter search. Your profile doesn't come up higher based on that caption or that headline that you have. The job titles are very important though. So being as accurate to what you did, but also as concise is really important. So data analyst versus business analyst are fairly similar. So you can kind of play with those however you like, but operations associate is pretty general. So then in the description, make sure to put the bullet points. Like if you use particular technologies, then those keywords will pop up in the search. Most recruiters may not be typing in a very specific role that you had at IBM or wherever that use really proprietary or internal terms for things. So sometimes you won't even see a software engineer or data analyst. You'll see something completely different, just associate. And that doesn't tell anybody almost anything, and it won't show up in that search. Since we use keywords, that's critical on the LinkedIn Recruiter or any of the platforms that recruiters use. It's just using Boolean searches. So it's and, ors, nots, things like that, using those operators. So understanding that the actual vocabulary you use is pretty important there. But the headline or captions, things like that, not so important, but definitely the job titles being accurate to what you did, and then including the descriptors and the tools, technologies that you used in the role somewhere on your profile.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Samira and Amy. It looks like the questions have slowed down. Maybe one more. Do you recommend going straight into volunteering and or consulting after getting an SF admin certificate? Thank you for the great question. Yeah, no problem, James. So the question is really about what do you do? I think after you get a Salesforce admin credential or pass a certificate, I want you to get a job as fast as possible, right? And for some people, that means that they have to apply to both full-time roles and they also have to pursue contract work or volunteer work to build their resume. right? Because it can be hard to get an entry-level Salesforce role with no past experience. So what I recommend you do is you pursue both full-time roles and internships, contract work, volunteering opportunities through Salesforce, so that you can build your resume as you're looking for that full-time role. So it's not an either or, it's an and, really. So I don't think that one is better than the other. The question is what can you get into fastest? What can you build your resume with? Because that's really important to be adding things to your resume. Amy, anything to add about Salesforce admin?
So if you're working with our career services team, we can definitely point you in the direction of Salesforce volunteer projects. And we've had students work for organizations like the Red Cross, other nonprofits to help them with some of their fundraising and CRM work, which is a great thing to then be able to add to your resume and show that you have Salesforce admin experience, because that's often kind of the key thing that employers are looking for. Another great resource is called Catch-a-Fire. That's another site that aggregates lots of different volunteer opportunities. So we can point you in the direction of all of these things. But like Lauren said, we really recommend that as you're actively searching for a job, these can be great things to be building your resume. But that said, we have had people that are directly getting opportunities, and it's always best if we can place you in a full-time job with, benefits and a great salary. So we're going to be doing the fastest route to get you there.
Awesome. All right, well, it looks like chat has slowed down, Q&A has slowed down. I want to thank Amy and Samira for being here later on the East Coast time. But we hope this was helpful for all of you. Again, you will get a recording of this as soon as it's processed on our side. So that might be later tonight. It'll probably be tomorrow morning. But know that you will get that recording at some point. And Yolanda, I know you've been at a couple of these webinars. Thank you so much for coming. I've seen some common names here. So we really appreciate you being here. We love to see our current students, our former students, our prospective students. Johnny, so happy that you started with us and that you're enjoying it so far. Excited to see you all in the classroom, and check out our programs online if you want to learn more. All right. Have a wonderful night, everybody, and see you at the next webinar.